Good morning, friends. Good to be with you on this Friday morning. It's almost afternoon already, I guess, but it is April the 3rd, Friday, and we are gathering virtually again this morning on Facebook Live, as we've been doing. I'll ignore that phone call coming in. It's usually a telemarketer anyway at this time. Good morning, Jim. Good to see you. Hope the newlyweds are doing well. And great to see you on. Cindy, good morning. Good to see you also. Hope you and Al are having a good day today so far. I am a little bit late in coming on today. Normally I try to get on between 9 and 10, somewhere around there, depending on what else may be going on. Some folks have inquired as to why I don't come on at a certain time, like every day, say 9:30. I would come on every day at 9:30. That's mostly because I'm on other calls, either for the church or for the annual conference or for the Board of Ordained Ministry, and those calls are set on Zoom, and so there has to be a certain time that I'm on, or else I'm doing something else in the church. But rest assured that you can see these videos that we're doing every day, this live Facebook. Facebook records them, and they're available on the First UMC page. They're available on that page on Facebook, our page, First UMC, to get them in that way. So just because you don't see me live doesn't mean you can't see me later on in the afternoon or the next day or whenever it's convenient for you. So good morning, Tracy. Good to see you on again. Just was talking to your mom a little while ago, and so all is good. JC, good to see you, and glad you're watching as well. So I just want to let you know that the best way to see those is so you can watch them later on. So don't worry if you don't see it live. We're not doing a whole lot of chatting here. People are just coming on and listening at this point, but just going through some announcements and things like that, and going through. We gather here. There's some worship recordings for Holy Week and Sunday, and of course we have Easter coming up, so it's a busy time for all that. So I am a little bit later this morning. I do apologize for that. But we are continuing with the Gospel of John, and as we move now into chapter 5, we are completed all of chapter 3 and 4, which, as I was saying yesterday, is really a key point or a key part of the gospel, with the meeting with Nicodemus and then the meeting with the Samaritan woman at the well. So, and we've also seen how in the Gospel of John, what's usually referred to as miracles in the Synoptic Gospels, here John refers to as signs. Signs, a particular word in Greek, semeia, is signs. And John is probably working from a source here, is what we're saying, so that when John had was working on his gospel, he likely had a manuscript in front of him. Some have referred to it as the Gospel of Signs, or the sign source, or whatever that might be, but probably a source that listed these signs of Jesus. And John has taken those and incorporated those into his gospel. And so we saw at the end of chapter 4 with the healing of the official's son, the very last verse says, "Now this was the second sign that Jesus did after coming from Judea to Galilee." So good morning, Mary. I see you're on too, and good morning, Susan. So as we continue now with chapter 5, we are starting in a familiar theme that John handles, and actually all the Gospels remember this, and that is when Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And this becomes, of course, a point of contention with the religious leaders, with the Judoi, the Jews, the Jewish leadership, who don't believe that Jesus should be healing on the Sabbath. As I say, we see it in all the Gospels. And so multiple attestation is the fancy word we use in biblical studies. When we see something occurring in multiple sources, we know pretty much that that's the way it went down. So Jesus no doubt healed on the Sabbath, no doubt got in trouble for it. We can say that. So the theory of multiple attestation applies here, and we see that in other ways as well. So verse 1, chapter 5 begins, after this there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Remember, Jesus had been in Galilee, and he was in Cana when he performed the second sign, as he performed the first sign too in Cana. of Galilee. So now he's going up to Jerusalem for a festival, the text says. A festival, the indefinite article a festival. Now, in the Bible, we go from different manuscripts in order to arrive at what we have in our Bible. And what I mean by that is there's not just one manuscript that we have for Scripture. There are multiple manuscripts, some more ancient than others. And usually the ones that are more ancient carry the more weight because we think that's closer to the original writing that took place when the Gospels and when the Scriptures were put together. So we have these what are called variants especially in the Gospels, but in the letters of Paul as well. So a variant might be one manuscript will say, and this is true by the way for this case, after this there was a festival of the Jews. Another variant might say, a different manuscript might say, after this there was the festival of the Jews, the definite article. So there's one version of this that says the festival, and another version that says a festival. And those scholars who spend their time just working with textual analysis have determined that the indefinite article, a festival, is probably the more original, and it got changed through, copyists and so forth, somewhere along the way to the festival in some manuscripts. Now, why is that important? You may say to yourself, who cares if it's a festival or the festival? Well, if it's the festival, then likely we're talking about the Passover, because the Passover for the Jewish people was the festival that they were required to go to every year. If it was a festival, could have been a number of different reasons why Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, there were three primary festivals that Jews had to go to Jerusalem for. One was the Passover. One was the Feast of Tabernacles, and the other one was the festival of Pentecost, too. Pentecost is originally a Jewish holiday, a Jewish festival. And we remember the story of Pentecost, of course, as Christians from the book of Acts, when the Spirit is poured out upon the disciples as they're gathered. So there's these three festivals. So we can judge that probably by the time of the year, it also wasn't the Passover, so it wouldn't be the festival, because typically the weather was cooler during that time, and a man who was sitting by the sheep gate pool wanting to go into the pool to be healed, as the story is about, probably didn't happen that time of the year. And so it was also the case for the Feast of Tabernacles. Probably didn't take place at this timing as well, for the same reason that it wasn't Passover. So that leaves us with Pentecost. Probably the feast that we're talking about, or the festival we're talking about here, is the day of Pentecost. So that's probably when Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So that's just to give you an example, different manuscripts when it comes to Scripture. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha. Bethzatha, the name of this pool, is also textual manuscripts as Bethesda, or Bethsaida is another way of another identification for this pool. So scholars are probably the best way to go here. So, and there is this sheep gate, and it's located in Jerusalem. It's one of the gates entering into the city, and near the sheep gate there was this pool, had 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. 38 years, the author tells us. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" So Jesus initiates the conversation with this man. Do you want to be made well, he says. Jesus kind of knew that this man had been there a long time. Now, how did he know that? Well, maybe this is just the what I call the ESP Jesus. He just kind of knew these things, right? That's possible. Or else someone may have told him that. Or he may have just intuitively known by seeing the condition of this man, looking at him. There's a whole lot of reasons why that might have been the case. So he knows he's been there a long time. He says to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up." The water gets stirred up, and there's a tradition here that is not included in this particular text about an angel stirring up the water at the pool. And maybe John didn't include this because he can say superstitious. Maybe he thought this was a superstitious thing and didn't like the way it sounded or the message it conveyed. But there was this thought that an angel on occasion would stand in the pool. And is referring to when the sick man says to Jesus, I have no one to put me in when the water is stirred up. He does try, it says. The sick man tries to get in the pool, and this is a little bit of Johannine humor here, you might say. While I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me. So someone's cutting him off to get to the pool, and he's not able to get to the pool when the water's being stirred up and he can't be healed. So Jesus said to him, stand up, take your mat, and walk. Very simply. Stand up, take your mat, and walk. At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Just from Jesus' words. Just take up your mat and walk. That's the first part of this story, an important part of the story for sure, the healing and this whole tradition about this pool, Bethzatha, near the sheep gate in Jerusalem. But really, the second part of the story is where the meat of this comes in. Now that day was a Sabbath, it says. The day that Jesus did this was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man, apparently the Jewish leaders were there, the Jews said to the man who had been cured, it is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat. They didn't even that he was no longer an invalid, not him carrying a mat around, right? Because it's the Sabbath and it's not lawful to do that. But he answered them, the man who made me well said to me, take up your mat and walk. They asked him, who is the man who said to you, take it up and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was. Again, this is a very Johannine theme as well. We find this over and over again. Who is in the know about Jesus and who isn't? So at this point, this man who's healed doesn't know, right? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple. So Jesus seeks him out. And Jesus said to him, see, you have, very interesting, do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. Jesus is making a sort of connection here, maybe, a connection between one's action and those actions. And as I said before, it's not because you do things wrong that God is zapping you or something like that, but we know when we do things that are not right, there are repercussions for us. And so that's probably what Jesus is referring to here. Don't sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. And again, there's this legalism, this Pharisaic attitude that we see in all the Gospels, right? All the Gospels have this, where Jesus heals on the Sabbath, breaks the law, technically, breaks the Torah, and he's called to task on it. But Jesus answers back to them in verse 17, my Father is still working. Interesting thing to say. My Father is still working, and I also am working. My Father is still working, and I also am working. This will drive the Jewish leadership crazy. This word right here, this verse right here. My Father is still working, and I am still working. So, on the surface, Jesus, of course, is kind of equating himself with the Father. He refers to his heavenly Father, which is blasphemous, actually. So that would be the first thing that would upset the Jewish leadership. The second thing is, my Father is still working. Think about that for a minute. What does it say in Genesis in the creation story? God created the world in 6 days, and what happens on the seventh day? God rested on the seventh day. God rests, thus making the Sabbath holy, which means that we should rest as well. Now, Jesus says, though, that my Father is still working, even though it is the Sabbath. And that totally violates what would be a very Jewish understanding of what God, the Creator, does on the Sabbath. God is supposed to be resting, so we're supposed to be resting. So this is another reason why the Jewish leadership, the Pharisees, the Eudoi, these words that we're using, why they would be so upset in verse 14 after Jesus says this in verse 13. Look what follows here. 18. Verse 18 after verse 17. For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself equal to God. So there it says it right there. says it right there in verse 18 to finish the story. For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Just by Jesus when he says, my Father is still working, and I also am working. So they're upset with him up until this point, but when he says that, now they're going to plot to kill him. They're going to plot to kill him even more so than before. So this is a really interesting story of healing on the Sabbath of this man who had been ill for 38 years, lying by this pool, by the Sheep Gate pool, in Jerusalem, waiting and waiting and waiting for the water to be stirred up so that he could get in there, and he's not able to get in there into the water once it's stirred up because people are cutting in front of him and so forth and not allowing him to get in. But when Jesus comes along, the simple words are said, stand up, take your mat, and walk. And that's it. And that leads into this whole discussion with the Pharisees. So I think we'll leave it off there with this first part of chapter 5, and we'll pick it up again next time with Jesus talking about the Son, because now the Father, so now the authority of the Son will be the next. And as I said before, Jesus in John's Gospel full of these long statements, these long speeches almost, these long teachings, whereas in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is very much into short little pithy statements, aphorisms they're often called in the Synoptics, just very short little teachings that are easy to remember. Here, these discourses go on a really long time, and we see that in the farewell discourse that'll be coming up with chapters of Jesus just talking. So a very different way to tell the story in the Johannine version of the gospel. So that's it for today, friends. It's good to see you all, and I see many other folks joined as I was talking. I think Debbie, you came on after, and Carolyn, and Kurt, my brother. Good to see you watching as well. Best to your family. Marilyn, happy birthday, Marilyn. I understand it's your birthday today. I wish I could sing happy birthday for you, but you don't want me to do that right now. So have a great birthday today, even in these difficult conditions that we find ourselves in. Kathy, good to see you joining also. And Beth, good to see you on. Say hi to Max for me. And wonderful colleague of mine came on, Judy Ann White. Good to see you on, Judy Ann, and my best to you and Roger. Please stay safe during this time. I'm sure you're sheltering in place, as you should. So good to see you on, and hope everything is well. So Bo, good to see you too, joining on, and hope you have a great day as well. Well, friends, until next time, be well, stay safe, and again, may God bless you in a way today that maybe you're not thinking about, maybe you're not expecting, maybe you're not anticipating. Be well, be safe. God bless.